what's some advice that you could give people, like, outline that fleet etiquette and the do's and don'ts of being out there and kind of, working towards working together?
What's the most egregious breach of etiquette?
I was going to ask that too. I want some of those stories. There's got to be some good ones.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right off the bat, it's probably just anchoring. The etiquette is not wanting to anchor on top of somebody. If you can read someone's t-shirt and you can hear their conversation and, you're probably a little bit too close. But I mean, the all-time worst is when you're fighting a fish. If you're fighting a fish, and it's become like, that's why we transitioned to fighting from the bow of a center console, because you would hook up in a fleet and you got a guy here, you got a guy there, you're boxed in, and you have to drive that fish out. So if that fish wants to go towards the other boat, you gotta drive, you gotta walk him out of the fleet. So
Sure.
That's become one of the biggest things on those packed days, is walking your fish out of the fleet, because if you get them tangled in an anchor line or in someone else's lines, it's a lot of times you're kissing that thing goodbye. So
So to walk them out, are you less drag pressure on it, or not trying to make them freak out too much? Just
it depends. Hey, if that thing's going through right to somebody's boat or right to their anchor line, and they're just sitting in the beanbag snoozing, I'll put the drag up. I'll stop him. Or if he is going the right way up on the high ground where nobody is, I'll just put the drag down and let him go. Just take everything. So that way, he's way out there, and then we can just put the boat in gear, chase him, put the drag back up, and go that way.
That's got to be another advantage of the center console.
It is. This past year, I've never seen anything like it, and you'll see some of this on the show. We would hook up, and these fish would never go straight up and down. And that's how you catch them, is you fight them, for how long it takes you. And then you get the fish straight up and down. You get him circling, he comes up slow, you put a dart in him, you put the tail rope on him. That's tuna fishing. This past year, you'd hook these fish, and they didn't want to be anywhere near the bottom. It would be 3 hours into the fight, and you'd see them a quarter mile up in the high ground splashing like crazy. So in that case, we would just chase them.
Speaking to the other boat, so in the summer, what boat do you run? What's your center console?
Yeah, so center console is it's a 32-foot Everglades. Hell of a boat. It's just this will be 10 years of commercial fishing abuse. And when you think of an Everglades, you don't usually, it wouldn't be in that class of like a commercial fishing boat. But you wouldn't believe, I still get people who ask me if the boat's new.
Yeah.
And 10 years of,
abuse.
You're talking about those Chatham trips, going, 90 miles and 4 or 5 footers, and do that a couple years. I think any regular boat would, have some screws loose and, some cracks in the fiberglass and whatnot. And, the Everglades, the thing is, it's a battleship.
That's awesome. I've heard a lot of good things about those boats. Specifically, like true to their DNA, they've always been kind of that brand that gives you an amazing rough riding boat. You've probably had it in some shit. Like, how does that thing handle the seas, and what are your limitations? Usually a lot of center consoles are like, we got to slow down. How do you run your boat when you're in those 4 to 5 footers, and what do you get out of it that you think is rare in that, in that class of boat?
It's how they're built.
Mm-hmm.
The ram cap process that they have it just makes the thing indestructible. They're unsinkable, indestructible, and you're saying going through rough weather. That boat will go through 20 knots through just about anything.
Really?
We're lucky we have a pilot house on there, and it's because we'll fish into November up here, and once we close that pilot house door, it will run through anything. We everything gets tied on, and you are just, it'll go through just about anything. Speaking of that, we've never missed a day of filming in, all the years that we've done the show, there's never been a day we've taken off of weather. So any day that, one of those big 46 Muscle Ridge or, 44 Calvin Beal, some of these other guys on the show, anything that those guys can go out there, we can be right there next to them. And not only that, we can beat them out there and come back quicker. So
you think that gives you an advantage as far as like how the show, for those of you guys that may be living under a rock and don't know how it's set up, there's a competition element to it where, there's a leaderboard and it's basically pounds of tuna or actually, dollars earned from tuna caught, dictates the standings. So does that give you kind of a competitive leg up for the purposes of the show, do you feel?
I think so. I mean, I think that speed, and we say it all the time, speed kills. And, we can fish later. We can get out there earlier. But, with the center console, it's a different style of fishing. So, you have these guys on a down east boat that, say in this competition, they're leaving at 6 p.m. the night before. You get out to your spot, you anchor up, you catch bait all night, you get sleep on the ball. You wake up at 3 in the morning and you put a rod out. And with a center console, you can't really do that. I mean, trust me, I tried that. The first year I did Wicked Tuna, I was like, yeah, we're going to go out there and, spend the night. And you just, I mean, when you wake up at 4 in the morning covered in dew, everything's soaking wet. You can't even charge your phone on the boat because everything's, it literally just says like water detected. So we've had times out there where, we got no contact with land.
The covered in dew, man, that's such a, one time we were out on an overnight fluke trip on the Helen H. I was like, I'm going to sleep up top because you have everybody snoring and farting in the cabin down below. So I wake up and I'm like hypothermic, just covered in the dew. But yeah, so it's
that's a real thing. So yeah, we just have a different game plan. Center console, we leave early. So instead of leaving at 5, 6 p.m. the night before, like a down east boat, we're leaving at 2, 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
On some of those Chatham trips, it's amazing. We leave at 1 a.m. and I mean, more often than not, we'd be back in Gloucester by 1 p.m.
Really?
So we'd run down there. It'd take 3.5 hours. I mean, that bites between 7 and 9 a.m. So pluck one off real quick, then run 3 hours back. And we're back in Gloucester by noon.
Yeah.
So part of the rules about Wicked Tuna is you have to depart from Gloucester. Like you couldn't trailer down to, Bass River.
I mean, you could, but you got to come back and unload to Gloucester.
Okay.
So that's where it's just how they
adding mileage to it, dropping a guy off the truck off. And
yeah, just
Now, how is the boat set up? So you mentioned there's a pilot house. Did you add that after you'd had it for a while? Was that something, or did you? When you got the boat, did you put the pilot house on there?
So yeah, that was actually factory pilot house.
Okay.
Everglades just had the model, and we, there was only like a half a dozen of them made, or 10 of them or so made, and it just wasn't a popular model. So they took it off, and they couldn't sell them. So we ended up grabbing one because it was just at the time my dad and I we wanted something where we could go out and fish April 15th ground fish in the spring, and fish all summer, and then when it gets cold in the winter or in the fall, still make it go out for Halloween and stuff like that. We go out for Thanksgiving and
oh, that's awesome.
The pilot house it just made it one. The boat you had that comfort, but you also had that speed. So you can fish these little windows, or if my dad and I wanted to go out and just go catch a cooler full of haddock and come back in and be back in by noon. I mean, it gave you that flexibility. But it's having that pilot house is huge, I'll tell you, because when it's rough out and you're staying nice and dry in there, it's funny. My camera guy, he sits on a bean bag, so it's me, my mate, and then we have a camera guy on the boat when we're filming. And the poor guy, he would just be looking inside, and we would just be like looking outside and seeing like a wet dog. You just feel bad for him, But we got to the point where he'd sit behind the pilot house on a bean bag, and then we would come out. We'd sit down, full weather gear.
Yeah.
And then he'd sit down, and we put a tarp over him, and we'd wrap the tarp in under the bean bag so that because he's still getting wet, and then even if you got your gear on, you're sitting in a puddle, and it sucks. But yeah, we'd get I'd be like, all right, we're here, and we'd literally unwrap my camera guy and be like, all right, here we go.
That's too funny.